welcome everyone to our very first episode of the Saturday Morning Fever podcast. And on our inaugural episode, our special guest is comic book artist Ted Woods. How are you doing today?
Doing awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So right off the bat, we do have a couple of housekeeping things going on we want to tell you guys about. The first of which is, if you guys are watching this live when this happens when it premieres on YouTube, this upcoming Saturday. This is going to be during the At Home Con. It is a special temporary event made in light of the coronavirus and other things going on by comic artist Rob Hogan, where several different artists and creators are hosting their own stuff in live events on Facebook, getting exposure to new people, and we're actually going to be kicking it off with this podcast. So if you're watching it then, go ahead and check it out. If not, I'll leave a link to the event in the description below, and hopefully you can find some links to some of the awesome artists doing stuff there. But Ted, you have a special event going on this month that you wanted to come on early and be the guinea pig for this particular podcast to talk about. So
yeah, I thought
why not let you have the floor there?
Yeah, I thought the project I'm working on right now is worth the craziness of being like, yeah, I'll submit myself to being the first guest on a podcast. So it'll be great. It'll be perfect. So yeah, like I am currently doing a commission drive for Women's History Month. And what it is like half of the proceeds will go to charity. And I'll talk about that in a quick minute, but it's a really fun commission kind of setup that I like to do. I do these all the time at conventions, so perfect for at-home con. So what I do is for $50, I can draw a picture of you as your favorite character, whoever it is, whether it's, the Doctor or a Jedi Knight or I don't know, like some Star Trek character, anything. Like, I mean, I've even had people be like, hey, can you draw me as like Darth Vader? I'm like, he's got like the mask thing, but sure, But yeah, so it's just this kind of 5x7 kind of chest up picture of you as whatever character you want. Like I said, it's $50, and it's kind of black and white, and if necessary, I can throw in a splotch of color or something like that. But the greatest thing about this, other than getting art personally made for you, is that 50% of all these proceeds are going to go towards the Philadelphia-based nonprofit organization Women Organized Against Rape. And it's this great organization that is fighting to end sexual violence in all of its forms against everybody. It's an awesome organization. They've got a 24-hour helpline for the whole Philadelphia area. They've got counseling, they've got art therapy, they've got tons of just great ways for people who've been victimized to connect and find ways to just kind of improve and grow and move beyond their victimization. So I'm really excited to be helping them, and we've already raised $100 for this charity. So I'm just like so excited that like this is the first time I've done this, and here I was like, maybe somebody will, get a commission. But yeah, we've raised $100. It's been great, and hoping to get a couple more.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for coming on here, and I want to thank you for your work promoting such a good cause right when people need it. For those of you guys watching, in the links below, you'll find links not only to all of Ted's work, but to all of the related resources connected to his cause. And we encourage you guys to go ahead and take some time and check that stuff out. So, moving on into your work in comic books, how long have you been doing art professionally, would you say?
Gosh, it is actually coming close to 10 years now, which
nice.
Feels really weird. Because I remember, so I went to Savannah College of Art and Design and graduated in 2010, and I remember, leaving my last class, and I didn't care about the graduation ceremony. I had no interest in going to that.
Right.
But I remember leaving my last class and calling up my brother and being like, "Hey, ask me what I do for a living." He's like, "Ted, what do you do for a living?" I'm like, "I'm a comic book artist." It felt so good, and I've been saying that for 10 years, and it still feels awesome. So, Yeah. I've been working professionally, doing freelance work, self-publishing, setting up at conventions, teaching, lots of different stuff for about 10 years now.
Absolutely, that's amazing.
Yeah, I kind of amazed that I haven't been killed doing it just because it's such a crazy industry to be involved in.
It absolutely
but I love
is.
it.
I mean,
and yeah, it's like I get to draw Star Wars characters. I get to draw Batman sometimes. I've done some cool freelance work for Marvel and FX and everything, so that's been really cool. But yeah, I think like my favorite stuff is doing the self-publishing and like kind of doing my own thing at conventions and such.
absolutely. So overall, looking through your normal portfolio and a lot of the work you do, particularly for conventions, you seem to draw yourself more towards a traditionally realistic art style. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm kind of in the a weird minority of comic create and just kind of general pop art, creators these days, because there's a lot of really great talent making kind of this cartoony or simplified versions of stuff, and there's tons and tons of people making digital artwork, whether it's realistic or cartoony or something in between or stylized or whatever. And those are all really fantastic aspects of the industry, but here I am like working pencil, paper, brushes, quills, all that stuff. I'm just like very, very traditionalist. I hate working on a computer for the most part. And yeah, like I've always gravitated towards that like super detailed, realistic style. And I think that like has just kind of grown over the years. And yeah, another thing about my style, like you'll notice there's a lot of black and white artwork, which I just kind of like working like that, and it's also significantly cheaper than color, both in like creation and in printing. So yeah, in the long run, it's been saving me some money, so that's been good too.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where I found myself drawn a lot towards the beginning when I was a film school graduate.
Yeah.
And looking through stuff historically, one of the main things that drew my attention at first was German expressionist work.
Oh God,
Chiaroscuro,
slang and all that stuff.
Oh man,
film is a huge influence on my comic book storytelling. Definitely, I try to pay a lot of attention to folks like Akira Kurosawa and Alfred Hitchcock and everything. And I think for me, like black and white film, like some of the good stuff, like Manchurian Candidate or The Third Man or something like that, it's like just really amazing black and white cinematography that influences how I make comics as well.
Yeah, it's just like I feel like that's part of the reason I do this podcast, but also I explore like history in general, particularly like what probably like pop art history in general is the thing that it really interests me, where there are so many weird parallels you run into, like the idea of having, Italian Western filmmakers making movies based off of Kurosawa's samurai films that were based off of American Westerns. Like, it's just this never-ending circle of influence in some of these cases.
Oh yeah, and it's weird like how that stuff. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine about Seven Samurai the other day, and how he was like, yeah, that's like just like the anime Samurai 7 that was, I'm guessing, based on that. I was like, yeah, which was based on like, also, I mean, you got Magnificent Seven, which there was the remake of the original, which was based on Seven Samurai. Right. And it's just, I think that's a really great example of like just how stories can be reinterpreted and reinvented a lot of times. And, I mean, if we're being honest, also kind of just like rehashed and dug up from the graves and beaten dead horses and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as a person who enjoys Saturday morning cartoons, that's something you run into a lot, is like, you run into this very interesting parallel of you having to define what originality is for yourself and how important or unimportant that is in certain cases.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Like, and now's really the time for that. Like, we're kind of in this weird era of like, reboots and remakes and such, and we have so many. Like, every property is getting greenlit for a film version of itself. Anything that's from the '80s, because let's be honest, a bunch of 30-something white guys, like, we're their target demographic.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, like not necessarily an 80s cartoon, but like I think the one that is like worrying me the most these days is that announcement that keeps kind of popping up every now and then about like a remake of The Last Starfighter. That is just like my favorite sci-fi movie of all time, and I'm like, just let it be, let it do its own thing in the 80s and be itself.
Last Starfighter, because here's like the particular discussion of how art, in particular film, ages is like one of the most fascinating things in the world to me, because it's very much that like how does it hold up discussion, and where like how different people mean different things by that question. And in more genre film is where that stuff stands out, more in general. Like the idea of, it is an interesting experience like it was for me, where I didn't watch The Last Starfighter until I watched it for a podcast like 2 years ago. And looking at parts of this movie where I'm like, wow, this still looks amazing. And then other parts of the movie I'm like, this looks exactly how I thought it was going to look.
Oh yeah. There's parts of it that are just like, oh man, that is
it's just, you have that very movie right there. You have that very Monty Python moment of, it's only a model. Shh. Like, and you get that with a lot of stuff, but but there is a certain appreciation you can have for the creative solutions people had to take to certain problems or certain things like that. Like, I have a friend of mine who we argue about the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film a lot.
Oh God, I'm definitely pro 1989.
Absolutely, it is one of my absolute favorites. And the argument I have for this movie is that the older the movie gets, the more that I can appreciate it. Because the farther I get away from the year 1989, the more that I can see the, like, glaring and fortunate, not aged well aspects of that movie as more of, like, I see the movie more as a period piece.
Yeah.
As far as, like, visual effects and styles.
The art style of that movie in general was really kind of unique in and of itself. It had a very unique look to it, and getting back into practical effects and everything. Like, I mean, I talk with my buddy Jay Fosgett a lot about like how practical effects will always just be more endearing to him and I. Just as audience members, we just like find that just somehow just more appealing visually, and it might have something to do with the fact that like we were raised on one version of filmmaking where digital like effects weren't really a thing, and when they did become a thing initially, it wasn't like really that great looking. And now we're in an era that's the complete opposite, where we have digital stuff just absolutely like completely making up a film in some cases. And practical effects are the more unique thing.
It's oftentimes it is a very like tool for the job kind of scenario, and it's interesting to see which directors make those kind of calls when and where, because some people often will act obsessively one way or the other on either one, often to a detriment. Like the two that get me is that there's a scene in one of the James Bond movies where he's falling from a plane, and they were like very insistent that you see like his face as he's falling, and like the effects of like, and like, I didn't know this until someone pointed this out to me, like the amount of this ridiculous like special effects. They dumped so much money into like this 30-second like frame by frame recreation of his face, rather than just like, we could just use a body double, we could just put him in a wind tunnel with some green screens. It's like, no, this needs to be
digital.
And like, and even a film like, like Mad Max Fury Road, which is known as just like this pinnacle and this grand defender of traditional special effects, does use a lot of visual effects to make it work. And it's kind of funny to bring it back to like me mentioning SCAD earlier. One of my professors talked, and this was in the context of making comics, but I think it applies to, I mean, to me, comics and film are like, weird stepsisters of each other as far as art media goes. But yeah, he would say that like
never rely on any one tool in your tool belt.
Absolutely.
And it's like, if you can't, do an entire project with a hammer or with a screwdriver, you need to use everything. And I think, like, for me, as a creator, as an artist, I've found the tools that I like to use, and I do some digital adjustment in Photoshop and everything, or like I'll use Illustrator when I need to, or something like that. But it's learning to not restrict yourself, because you have, as any kind of artist, you have such a wide range of tools at your disposal these days, and there's, in one sense, you can challenge yourself, be like, okay, I'm only going to be using this or these tools, but you don't want to do a disservice to your audience with the same stroke. You don't want to just like not put Pierce Brosnan or whoever it was in a wind tunnel.
It was one of the Daniel Craig ones they did.
Oh God, yeah. So yeah, like like as an artist myself, to bring it back to that, like I think that I try to just focus mostly on the traditional stuff, but I'm learning, much to my, like, I mean, yeah, I'm an 89-year-old man in disguise. Like, much to my chagrin, I'm like, okay, I can learn some computer stuff, but kids these days with their, Adobe Photoshops and their hula hoops and stuff, like, yeah, it's a little frustrating to us old whippersnappers that just hate technology in general. But I'm learning.
It's interesting because as a writer, the relationship with technology it's still there in a lot of ways, but it is different. For me, the main thing was that by the time I got to the point where I was writing, like, quote unquote, like, more professional scripts, is when clouding came around in a way that you could write a little bit anywhere. And it changed your entire mindset of how you came up with ideas. Either having, like, your scrap boards around with you, or just, like, plugging away, like, 2 or 3 lines of a script, during a lunch break, and then coming back to it. Or in the way that, like, the number of times I've had, you have, like, major scripts that just, like, files get corrupted, or stuff like that. And then you just... Sometimes, that helps you to make that one more draft that you needed, but other times you're just like, it's just not gonna,
I think, like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because for me, the whole, like, I've been told so many times, oh, carry a sketchbook with you everywhere you go, because
right.
You never know when you're going to want to draw something out and everything. And I have never just been like, oh, I want to draw this right now. And I was just like, if I'm going to draw, I've got to be, like, at my table, like, headphones on, everything else, like, completely tuned out, and, like, sketching on location and such. Like, I can do it, and it's much more of, like, something I have to force out of myself, rather than, like, oh, I just feel randomly compelled to draw this image or something like that. That's much more rare for me as a creator, and I had to learn that was okay. It's like, okay, I don't have to, like, carry a sketchbook around out of guilt for feeling like, oh, only a real artist does that. It's like, no, everybody kind of has their own thing. So,
one thing I find interesting with the sort of the relationship you have in the comic industry with writers to artists is I find it harder for me as a writer sometimes dealing with the idea of, like, the writing equivalent of doodling or sketching. Could often be an interesting thing, difficult thing to challenge oneself with. Yeah.
And I mean, so I've written my own comic scripts as well, so I get a little bit of the idea of just, like, writing ideas and dealing with those, and, like, the doodling process of that. And I think, like, one thing that I remember hearing that always kind of stuck with me is that, like, sketching and doodling and, like, keeping your brain active like that, it is, in a sense, like, exercising a muscle and maintaining it throughout the day or the week or whatever. And so there's this level of importance to it. And I think it's also just, like, finding however that works best for you.
lately that's been a thing that I find that's worked very well for me, where I recently did like a challenge thing for myself where I took like, I forced myself to come up with like 15 different comic ideas and then narrow that down to 10. And then, you know, as I'm trying to get more stuff like more on like a public pitched level, because sometimes what happens to me is I get so locked up with getting the project that I'm working on actually into production that I forget to write more things or to think about other new stories.
It's always good to have, like, you know, more than one iron in the fire. I think that's one thing that I've learned in, still surprising me, 10 years of being a comic artist, is it's like, yeah, you've got to have like 10 different things lined up, because like each job is just, that's going to take you so far. And then you've got to, like, okay, what's next? What's the next thing I'm working on? And you don't want to run dry on something like that.
You know, it's, and luckily for us, we do like live in an area that is very good for comics. I don't think it's a lot of people think about too much that aren't in the industry, as far as like you have for either for Hollywood or for television or so on and so forth, there are like, people think of these big cities, but most people don't think about geography as far as comics go outside of like the actual conventions themselves, let alone the actual like comic scenes. Outside of Marvel and DC, people usually think about where other comics come from or where those processes can be.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because like I remember hearing once upon a time, you know, as far as like comics history goes, that like so much was just based in New York. I mean, artists and writers and everything, they were all in New York, and like that's just, they all worked at the office of whatever the publishing company was. They had several, you know, but now you've got so many of us creators that just, you know, like live at home and do that thing. And so having conventions is crazy important, because in some cases it's like the only time that we get to see each other.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah.
and yeah, like, so I lived in Michigan for 6 years, and it's talking about a thriving, you know, comic scene, is that kind of like upper northwest or northeast, Midwest, kind of, you know, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio type stuff. Just lots of small conventions, which I think are, at the end of the day, I've done so many like tiny conventions where like nobody came to my table, but
I've totally been there.
Yeah, but then like those small conventions are just like the lifeblood to me of what being a comic fan is, because it's like that's one where you go to, you know, you get some cool merchandise, you meet a couple of cool artists and stuff. It's a much more like personal and intimate experience rather than going to something like, you know, C2E2 or Boston or something like that, where it's just, you're overwhelmed with the number of people, and there's like, yeah, you can get in line to meet like Tim Sale or something like that, but it'll take you most of the day. But yeah, like I think like having these conventions that are so readily available to us, which is funny to say because Emerald City was just canceled because of the for the coronavirus.
You know, President health scares.
Now,
yeah, not this second, but
yeah, hey, good plug for At Home Con.
At Home Con this Saturday.
But yeah, like it's good because it's like you get that like balance of, you know, small conventions and large conventions where you can just like meet tons of different creators and fans and such, and you try to make connections with as many of them as you can.
Yeah, it's nice that we do have the scene that we have around here, and, you know, it's because we were able, you know, of the scene that we have, that I was able to reach out and build something like this like I did. I mean, like, behind the scenes was literally me just casting this giant net in a Facebook chat of, like, here's, like, every, like, pretty close to almost every single, like, creative comic book person I know. I'm like, I have this stupid idea. Is anyone down for this?
And sure enough, we were all on board for it.
It was, and it was close to all, like, honestly. And then some people who, you know, I know will do it, but just like left the chat just because of just the mass of it. But
Yeah.
like at least confirmed, I have like 20, 25 people and a few people from the not only from the comics industry, but from the animation industry.
Oh, good.
Eventually, that are going to be on this show.
Yeah.
And it's a wild ride, and I will say,
Well, it's at the end of the day. I mean, we're all nerds.
of course,
Like, you didn't get into, none of us got into this work because it's like, I'm not a big superhero person. I don't like comics in general. I just like making them, and it's like, no, we all like got into it because we were watching Saturday morning cartoons, and we were.
you got to
reading,
draw your influences from somewhere, and childhood is so much of that. But speaking of Saturday morning cartoons, it wouldn't be a cartoon podcast if we didn't jump into it. And welcome back to Saturday Morning Fever. So, in our second segment here is where we dive deeper into the core of this podcast, which is Saturday morning cartoons. Now, very quickly, my background with Saturday morning cartoons that led me to make this podcast is I am the writer of a book called The Man Who Watched Batman. It is a series of books in which I analyze and review every single episode of the 1990s Batman animated series from beginning to end, scene by scene, line by line, for 114 episodes. Moving forward from that, I'm starting up a new book series, which you can see the main logo for up above us, and part of the reason for this podcast is promoting and keeping you guys up to date on what's happening with it is my new series, Saturday Morning Fever, which I am writing a book, eventually, if these are successful enough, over each of the major Saturday morning cartoon show blocks of the years. The very first book in the series is the original Toonami era from... Don't crucify me in the comments if I get this wrong. I want to say is somewhere around 1998 to 2014. It's very close to that.
Sounds right.
Just a little, give or take 20 years that the original run went away for about 5 or 6 years, and then it came back again, and now it's still going, which is pretty cool. But right now, working at the beginning of that book, and so what we do with the first part of this cartoon podcast is, I want to discuss briefly the shows I've been watching in the book so far, and I kind of check it with my guests to see if they have any connections with them that I may have missed. So, going off the beginning, I'm in, like, the early days of Toonami at this point, so the main things that are showing up right now, the first anime ever to debut on Toonami was Robotech, which I had never even heard of before.
Yeah. For me, I didn't get into Robotech until, say, this is like you with Last Starfighter, until like maybe last year or something like that. And I found it on Netflix, and I was like, "Oh, cool! What's this?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome!"
It's definitely interesting. It is.
Yeah. Like I did my Wikipedia rabbit holes of research and everything. I was like, "Oh my god, this is like just all the like the translation and the like combining of different shows or whatever."
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is historically by a long shot the quote unquote the oldest Toonami show by like a significant margin.
Yeah, but oh my god, it was so fun to watch. So when I watched it last year, but not on Toonami, it was. But yeah, like I mean, I definitely have my own experience with Toonami that I could certainly talk about as well if you want to do that.
Absolutely, we'll get there for sure.
Yeah.
Usually this won't be as much of like a rattle off. It's just I'm at the beginning of the book, so I've been like rapid firing through a couple shows. So it was mainly that one. Thundercats I just wrote the review for. Voltron I just did like yesterday. And then Beast Wars was the other one.
Oh yeah. Jeez. You are taking me back to like,
they did a lot of mech shows. Like at least this block I'm looking at right now is a lot of mech shows.
Yeah. Well, like my little brother was more into Beast Wars than me. He was a big fan of it, but yeah, that was, man, those are some classic shows right there.
So where do your Toonami memories lie, or your overall, just like where
Yeah.
your nostalgia lie with the world of Saturday morning cartoon shows?
So I guess it would have been in the like. So for Toonami, it wasn't the Saturday blocks; it was the weekday blocks that I was like spiritually attached to, and the late night ones too.
Yeah, because they
But
had
like,
it was like Midnight Run, Rising
yeah,
Sun, and just the normal Toonami block was like
yeah, there
they're like
was.
4 to 8 block or whatever it was.
Yeah, I mean, like coming home from. So I was in high school, so it was like I think it was around like junior and senior year. So that would have been like 2002 ish, that ballpark area. Um, but coming home from a long day at school, clicking on Toonami, and watching Dragon Ball Z, and just letting my brain ooze out of my ears while doing that, while just watching Vegeta yell. It was
Right.
just such a great way to unwind for the day. And like, I don't know, it was just so cool, like, because I mean, I'd seen like anime stuff before of like let's see, like, I mean, I'd seen like weird random clips of like Astro Boy, or what else had I seen? Like um my little brother was into Digimon. I'd seen Pokemon and stuff. I was just like, that wasn't my thing. But like once I watched just like one episode of DBZ, I was like, oh my god, this is like really awesome. And yeah, I just like got hooked. So yeah, that was kind of my major Toonami fix on the regular, I would say.
Yeah, DBZ was the big one for a lot of people. The interesting thing for me was just as a kid that you didn't have this immediate realization of what was American and what was Japanese. It was all just like
Yeah,
cartoons.
yeah,
And Toonami's format of airing this mix of like 80s reruns, modern American cartoons, and old and new anime of
yeah.
various genres all in this one block in a way that other people weren't doing at the time was very formative to a lot of different people.
Yeah, yeah. I remember like, so I teach some classes as well as do the comic thing. And
Right.
one of my favorite classes to teach is one for teens. And I was talking about, so one of the classes that I do for them is, it's called Comics and Manga Learning from the Masters. And each week I talk about a different artist and creator, and like how they basically like change the industry in some fashion or another. And it's all people that they've like never heard of, but are like really, like, historically speaking, very, very important. Like the first class was about Jack Kirby or something like that.
Right.
So and so I would talk about a couple of the different artists, and this is something you're going to need to edit through really quick in the
Okay,
final
sure.
cut, because I'm blanking on the creator's name. Dragon Ball Z creator.
Akira Toriyama?
Akira Toriyama. Yeah. So yeah, there was a class where I talked about Akira Toriyama and how he created DBZ, or well, Dragon Ball, and just like everything that spawned from it. And it was, and of course I had to talk about like his like Chrono Trigger and the other video game stuff that he did. And it was just a really cool lesson. But like at one point, I just like the slide, I just had Tom from Toonami, the robot. And I think it's like when he had that, like the design of him where he had the like that weird like beer belly or something.
Yeah, because there was 3 Toms and then Moltar did the first
Yeah,
season.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It was just that was the slide. I was like, okay, y'all, like, you might not understand this, but Toonami, man, that was it. Man. Like that defined our generation, and that introduced so many people to anime and manga. And I think that's really one of the great things that Toonami did, was like it gave this whole generation of fans and many, and like you and me, creators, like this like new exposure to Japanese, animation and filmmaking, and just their version of storytelling. And it was such a new thing for us. It was such a great way to be introduced to it too.
Yeah, I think that was The styles of storytelling, that was the main thing that struck out to me when I was watching Robotech for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
The closest comparison I've been able to give people nowadays, like I mentioned in the book, because it was difficult for me to pin down how you pitch the idea of the tone of Robotech to other people, and the thing I came up with most is, like, if Gundam is Star Wars, then Robotech is Star Trek.
Yeah. Yeah,
like
that's
it's much more contemplative. It's a lot more deeper in traditional science fiction than it is into like action fantasy.
Yeah,
in the way that a lot of other mech anime were at the time.
Yeah, and gosh, that was another thing. Like Toonami, like I think the whole Gundam, I guess, like franchise or whatever it would be called, is like that was one that like I wish I would have been able to get into at the time that it was on Toonami pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And yeah, because like 0083 and Gundam Wing and like all that stuff, like I still need to really watch that. But the one that I did get into, and I eventually bought the DVDs for and watched all throughout college, was G Gundam, which is apparently like the one that everybody hates.
Oh, that's the one that I like.
I just loved the idea of like a giant killer robot like fight tournament.
Oh, absolutely. I like, man, looking through the list of shows I have to watch, quote unquote, have to watch for this book. And I just had a moment where I'm like, I have to watch so much Gundam.
Oh my god, yeah. Cowboy Bebop was another one that like really, oh my gosh, like that like blew me. I think that's probably for me the strongest example of Japanese storytelling and like what their focuses are.
It's interesting because that show has such an influence from American culture.
Yeah, there's a lot of noir feel in it, and yet there's this weird mix of like kind of that more like emotional and evocative, filmmaking and everything, where they try to give you more focus on the scene itself and the feelings that you're going to feel rather than just like here's some straightforward storytelling. And yeah, it's just I never stop recommending Cowboy Bebop to people.
Absolutely.
It's such a perfect series. And the movie itself, like the animation of the movie, is just mind-blowingly good. So,
yeah, it's great that we live in a place where we have such a better archive for all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Compared to what we used to. So many shows get lost over the years. Both good and bad, and even the bad ones, I feel like there's still a lot people can learn from. There's
still something that needs to be remembered from those.
And and some stuff that like just for crazy reasons we did come so close to losing. Like the fact that so many people don't realize that it took us like 50 years to get official home releases for the 66 Batman series.
Oh god.
like the legal battle with that was just unending.
Yeah.
So the only way you could ever watch it was like you'd get people with like TV Land bootlegs online, and that's for the shows like that were popular that people cared about. If you're trying to find like a bootleg archive for like an obscure Saturday morning cartoon show or something like that didn't have nearly the fan base, I think you're just not going to find it.
I think a good example of that would be The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest. Like that was a huge favorite of mine growing up, and like the DVDs for those, you can tell there was like, boy, this is literally the best they could do to put this together. And like, I mean, they only like, I think it's like 2 or 3 sets just to get season 1 of it or something like that. And it was a lot and they're so hard to find and everything.
Absolutely.
It's not easy to get, but that show and Quest World in it, which hasn't aged well.
Man, I mean, there's like, in the book, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm also like, there are certain times where rather than talking about a specific show, I just go on like a talking point about like different eras or things like that. And one of them is just this idea of how early computer generated animation is just such a polarizing thing for people. Yeah. And I think that it's not really a thing I even blame people for. I think it is just a very personal thing that just affects people in a subconscious way.
And even at the time, like I looked at the Quest World segments, and I mean, God, their shoulders are on their necks, and it's so weird looking. And it is just like even then, like as a kid, I was like, this looks really bad, but it's also really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you can tell that they were doing everything they could, but it was just one of those concepts that like the technology at the time just wasn't able to do everything that they were wanting. But it's still, I mean, there's the gimmick, the novelty of it. And I think one of the things that like really blew me away is that like, you look at something like Jonny Quest, which I want to say is like 1997. I want to say
it was during the furry. It was like in the second block of Toonami, like their second like they switched programs in and out, but that was definitely like one of the first 10 or so. Cause it's like one of the shows I'm about to review.
Yeah,
is Real New Adventures of Jonny Quest.
Yeah, they there was that, and then I remember like by the time Bruce Timm's Justice League came out, and that, oh my God, that show blew me away. It was
like 2001, 2004.
Yeah, it's just not a lot of time in between those two shows, but like there was like the kind of the digital version of like you'd see the Watchtower satellite floating, or like there'd be a couple of times where they would just I remember one thing where like a truck has to like get blown off the road so it kind of rolls and stuff. Mm-hmm. So they digitally animated that. And so it's like it's such a subtle, like it doesn't change how it looks or anything. It's just it is now digitally animated, and it's so seamless and so good. And to see that amount of progression of that medium go from like Real Adventures of Jonny Quest to Justice League in such a short period of time,
absolutely,
is really, really cool to witness as a viewer.
The one I always point to is on Netflix now. The new series, Voltron Legendary Defender, has some of the best, like on a technical level, some of the best 2D, 3D digital hybriding I have ever seen. Like, I legitimately watch that show in the middle of some of these mech fights, and I actually forget I am watching combination 2D, 3D images in the same plane.
Yeah.
Just because of the way that they handle it, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
It's a gorgeous show. Yeah, I remember I saw the first 2 seasons of it. It was just like it looks so pretty, and and that I think that's one of the good things about like kind of this era of reboots that we live in is that we have like I think the best example of it, not just Voltron Legendary Defender, but also that like 2000 something remake of He-Man. I was like finally seeing an 80s show that was like pretty cool, but there's issues with it, and then seeing like a remake of it that's like, this is what it should have been. This is what the creators probably really intended. This is like everything I wanted it to be.
Yeah, it's just like, especially because the people at, because as we all know, looking back, the people at Ruby Spears just had such a tender, loving care for all of their property. Oh my God, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of my favorite shows came out of Ruby Spears, but like, it's kind of hard to like. There's some rose-colored glasses looking back at some of those shows.
Some of it's There's I think like there's definitely highs and lows of that era. So.
Well, I mean, it's comparable very much to like Silver Age of comic books. This idea of just the frequency in which work just needed to be done.
Yeah.
That our standards went to different places than noticing whether or not He-Man and Skeletor have the exact same body color, different colors.
Oh my God, yeah. And there's like, I feel like that's one of the things that is a good example of it, is that like a standard season at the time was like, I mean, how many episodes? Like, 30, 40 episodes or something like that.
Like there's like
and today, it's like, okay, this season will be 8 episodes. It's like, you could never get away with that, 20, 30 years ago. But nowadays, it's like, oh yeah, because it's Netflix or it's Hulu or whatever, or it's just, the episodes are 45 minutes long now with no commercial breaks. It's like, there's all these avenues that creators can use to like build quality instead of quantity, which, and there's arguments for both sides.
Absolutely.
Of that, but but yeah, like you've got such a different, like, it's almost apples and oranges of comparing like modern, availability of like options for creators to have as far as animation or comics or filmmaking go, of this era and like 30 years ago or something.
Yeah, there's something to the creativity of seeing what people pull out of nothing.
Yeah,
like that idea of, especially in the anime industry, or because there was a similarity in between anime and with Saturday morning cartoon animation, in this idea of having to survive and thrive in what was known as like the advertainment era.
Mm-hmm.
Like there, just that idea of like, all right, we have this toy line, we have 4 characters with names,
30-minute
and we have to make it's the idea that like for a generation, you imagine someone at a meeting, if they were to say that like one day, like, here is this line of mechanical toys, and this guy is a giant robot that transforms into a semi-truck. Within 3 to 5 years, this character will make kids cry.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that is a thing that happened in the 80s is still mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it was, you had so many shows, G.I. Joe and, Ninja Turtles and all that stuff that was just like, we're in this to sell toys. Like, that's what we're here for, And yeah, it's like, and to think that not just in 3 years this character will make the kids cry, but in another 20 years they're going to make like these wildly, humongously budgeted films about these characters and this series, and like people will take these characters very serious.
Absolutely. And
decades.
Looking at the legacies and comparing the legacies of these, of these various characters, and it's looking back, the thing that fascinates me is this idea of trying to predict which ones were going to be the ones that went the distance, and the ones that did are never the ones you would have.
Oh yeah, and you can always tell. Like, I think Street Sharks is such a fun example of like, oh well, Ninja Turtles is successful. Well, let's just do that again, and we'll be successful too.
Right. Even worse than that, you had which, thank God this is the show I'm making you watch later, but Battletoads tried that.
Oh God, yeah.
Which rather than going to series, they made the mistake of doing like a pilot on a VHS tape release. Yeah, strategy. So they only had one episode instead of 13.
That too.
It is like one of the worst pieces of animation I have ever seen. I have watched it like 4 times now. And I have to watch it at least once more because some unlucky son of a gun is going to make me watch. I'm going to have to make him watch it with me on this podcast eventually. I just have to figure out who do I like enough to get them on this podcast. This punishment? Yeah, I got to like them enough to get them on the podcast, but not enough to stop them from.
Because you're never going to talk to this person again.
Oh, of course. Yeah. That's what I told. That's what I told Pat when he agreed to do this podcast. I texted him afterwards. I'm like, well, I made you watch Battletoads with me. Like, you it's in for a penny, in for a pound at this point.
I love it.
It's just this idea that, like, like, Ninja Turtles, even just the original show went 10 seasons.
Oh, my God.
And there's still...
Well, there's the remakes, too, that you've had it's... Like, the comic, and it's funny because like I was the kid that had so many toys and was so obsessed with Ninja Turtles that my mother like took away all my Ninja Turtles toys because she was like legitimately worried that I was like obsessive about them, and so that's when I got into Batman, and so yeah, she's to blame for that. But yeah, like I loved Ninja Turtles growing up, and we've had so many different versions of it, both good and bad. And yet here we are nowadays with the comic series from IDW. It's like one of the few comics that I read on a semi-regular basis, and it's still written by Kevin Eastman and everything. It's to me the best version of them, and it's so cool to like compare contrast all the different versions, everything from like the original indie comic to Next Mutation to the Nickelodeon cartoon that just came out recently. There's just so many versions of it now.
And it's and some of the other ones that stood the test of time, like Scooby-Doo, is still going.
Yeah,
like that one, because like Ninja Turtles makes a little bit more sense to me, because like there's an inherent like childhood checklist of Ninja Turtles that I can get. It's bright, it's colorful, it's violent, it's zany. Like, that stands the test of time. Scooby-Doo, like, has gone through so many permutations, going through completely different approaches. You know, like, either keeping it, like, the way it was, feeling very much a thing of the 60s and 70s, going into more of a modern take, going back to making it a throwback series, doing, there was at one point, there was two of them going on at the same time that just appealed to different kinds of Scooby-Doo audiences.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Which I found was really interesting, because you had back-to-back, you had What's New Scooby-Doo, which, for my opinion, is the best go-to if you just want to see, like, a slightly more modern version of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Like, just, like, it's the same formula, it's the same show, just cleaned up and brought up to modern standards.
Yeah.
And then you had Mysteries Incorporated, which was the... like, we're telling actual mysteries, very, like, fan meta, indulgent series. Like, there's a Lovecraft episode of that show where they do that joke throughout the whole episode of, like, this creature, it sounded like this thing was eaten by that and gargled this and that, like, making fun of that way of speaking throughout the whole thing in this episode. And I'm like, what kid is going to get an H.P. Lovecraft joke?
No.
Just... and it explored fan ships and like did like season-long mysteries and
oh jeez,
it's interesting to see these shows like as a legacy more than just as their their one-off thing.
And I think like what's in yet another take that they're doing on it now with that new Scoob movie coming out is once I saw that like Blue Falcon and Dynomutt were gonna be, I was like, we're doing like Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe.
We're doing like Scooby-Doo All-Stars with
I was
with
like,
special guest Don Knotts and like
this is like what's his face, the bad guy from Wacky Racers is going to be in it as well.
Dick Dastardly.
Yeah, Dick Dastardly. And so, like, you're going to have Muttley, you're going to have Dynomutt, you're going to have Scooby, all in one movie. I was like, I can get behind this. This is going to be good. So, I mean, it just brings us one step closer to a Jonny Quest movie, I feel like. So
it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, only a matter of time.
Because it's just like, it's... The multi-levels of nostalgia are built into there, and already there sort of is room in, like, the Hollywood lexicon for another new, you know what I mean? Like, Indiana Jones is out of the way now.
Yeah.
So there is, like, room for a franchise to kind of fill that, like, adventure... waits
like
kind
kid
of
friendly, but also the parents can enjoy it type stuff. Yeah, like I think that can, and like the thing about the Hanna-Barbera stuff. And speaking of Hanna-Barbera Cinematic Universe, if you want another good example of that, check out the comic series Future Quest. Oh my god, that was awesome.
I am surprised at how much I've never found a franchise like. Hanna-Barbera has one of the most interesting approaches to IP management I have ever seen.
Oh yeah.
Like just the very like postmodernist take they took with like all of their legacy characters with like Harvey Birdman or with Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Oh my god, Harvey Birdman defined my college years in so many ways. Yeah, that they definitely knew how to just kind of keep their stuff going in whatever format they decided on that week. And yeah, like, I think that, I mean, I'm excited to see where these characters go, like, kind of with the world that they create for this kind of new iteration and how far it goes. Because, I mean, that's the fun thing about it is, like, there is no shortage of material that they have.
Absolutely.
Where, like, I mean, even if you just pulled from, like, the Alex Toth created stuff, like, you'd still have, like, a very, like, healthy, robust, list of characters that you could make, really fun movies and TV series out of. So, yeah, that can definitely go far.
And I'm glad that we live in a world that has so much stuff for creative artists to pull from.
Oh, yeah.
And to, build more and more amazing shows for generations to come.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I want to take a moment to thank Ted Woods for coming on to our show today. We've had a great time here talking about Saturday morning cartoon shows, old and new. So on top of the charity drive links located below, on top of supporting at HomeCon, Ted, if the lovely people would like to know where they can find you, your wonderful work, and look into more of the amazing stuff that you do, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me in my two major formats of Facebook and Instagram. Just go Ted Woods Art on either of those. And I post semi-regularly. Once con season kind of gets into high gear, I'll be posting way more regularly. But I've been posting some different commissions and some different just art pieces that I've been doing, talking a lot about like convention appearances coming up. I'm going to be doing a couple of in Michigan Cherry Capital Comic-Con and Motor City Comic-Con. So that's going to be really good. But yeah, and talk about the commission drive obviously as well. And yeah, so just go to facebook.com/TedWoodsArt or hit me up on Instagram at TedWoodsArt as well.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to check out more episodes of Saturday Morning Fever, you can check us out here on youtube.com/DeadmenInc. For a lot of our upcoming episodes and for our bonus segment for this week. Each and every week on Saturday Morning Fever, me and our special guest will be doing a watch-along riff track to a Saturday morning cartoon show, often curated for our particular guest, of which at the end of the show we reveal what that is going to be. So for this week, being our pilot episode, those of you guys who are watching this on the recording will notice at the very beginning that we have a Saturday Morning Fever theme song. What a lot of people don't know is actually what that, although it is a cover and not the original, many people, unless you're looking carefully, might not know or be familiar with what show that is the theme song to. Of all of the obscure video games that ended up making it into the world of Saturday morning cartoon shows, none are more strange and bizarre to me than the 13-episode show Pole Position. You may be wondering, how do you make 13 episodes based off of Pole Position? We're gonna find out.
Okay.
So I want to thank Ted once again for coming on with us. Follow all of the links below, and we will see you guys on the next episode of Saturday Morning Fever.